Hey everyone, my name is Jaswanth and I'm the QA lead at Transpire. I'm from Melbourne and I work for a company called Transpire, and we are basically a mobile app agency. And I'll be presenting about implementing CI/CD with mobile in mind. So what we'll be talking about is my experience with CI/CD specifically for mobile. Before we jump in, I just want to give a quick introduction about me. I did my master's in software engineering in the University of Melbourne. And since then, I've been working as an Android developer initially. And then I started doing some of the iOS and React Native work later on. But a few years later, I changed into a test automation engineer. And I specifically for mobile apps. So now I lead a team of test engineers who are specialists in XUI test and Espresso, which are native testing frameworks for Android and iOS. So let's get started. So as I said, in this presentation, I'll be talking about three things. The first one being my experience with CI/CD and how it went well with the mobile side of things and how it's different from what the web apps are. And then I'll talk a little bit about a quick demo on how to set up a mobile app CI/CD pipeline from scratch. Starting from the build triggers to deploying it and installing it on your phones. And finally, I'll be talking a bit more about some of the complicated tasks that are involved in setting up CI/CD for mobile. So before we get started, I'll give you some context on where mobile sits. So let's say we'll compare a web app and a mobile app pipeline. So let's say we're going to deploy a React web app and compare it with deploying an Android or an iOS app. So I've just listed some of the main things that's challenging when it comes to mobile. So the first thing, which is, I think if someone has already worked on it, would have experienced this already, is to sign your app. So any Android or iOS app has to be signed after it's been built before it's being deployed. Whereas, let's say, for example, if you want to do the React app, all you need to do is to build your React app and deploy it into an S3 bucket, for example, and you'll have a URL at the end, which you can straight away use it. But with, as I said, with Android and iOS, what you have to do is to do some signing, and you should have those certificates and all that set up properly, especially in the when you want to set it up in CI/CD. But when you want to do it in Xcode, it's all like pre-done for you. So the manual one is not that hard. And then we've got the build environment. So let's say we want to do the React app example itself. So to build a React app and publish it, you can build it in any computer. Like it can be a Windows computer or a Mac one, or it can be in the cloud as well. But when it comes to mobile apps, specifically for iOS, you need to have a Mac OS to actually build it, and you have to have the particular Xcode version and all that. So there's the dependency already there. And when you work with like Android and iOS, it becomes tricky because you can't just use Linux for Android. You need to have like an iOS based OS or Mac based OS for building your iOS apps. The next challenge is that the test environment itself. So for us to run your React based apps and for you to actually test them, what you need to do is that you can do it in the same build environment, and all you need is a browser to run them, right? You don't need a specific dependency like an emulator or device from. But when it comes to mobile, you'll need either an emulator, which is usually hard to set up in the CI, or you might have to go to something like a device farm. So that becomes tricky. So there's like multiple pieces now in your CI pipeline for building and for testing and for deploying. So that's one of the biggest challenges in there as well. And the other challenge that comes with the mobile apps is the new cross-platform apps that's actually coming up. So we've got like React Native and Flutter, for example. So what happens is you have like two different frameworks. One is your cross-platform example, and you've got your native Android and iOS. So now to make these two things work together, it's also a different challenge. Unlike in web apps, you just have like one package, and there's nothing else that's actually like dependency on that. And finally, the way you actually deploy and manage apps is different. So when it comes to like a web app, all you do is like you build, and you've got like a build folder where you can just deploy it. And at the end, you'll have like a URL to actually go and access it. But with Android and iOS apps, you'll have like an IPA or an APK that you have to download to your mobile phone and install it. But also specifically for iOS, you can't actually just download it from anywhere. There's a set of rules and there's a set of behind the scenes stuff you have to do to actually be able to install it on your phone. So there's those complications as well. And again, as I mentioned, there's like multiple pieces where there's your phone involved, there's your build environment involved, there's your test environment, and there's your device farms. So within the CI, you need to make sure that you can try to configure everything at one place with less hassle. So moving on, let's quickly touch on about my journey, my experience with CI/CD for mobile apps. So there are multiple like tool sets that's available, and especially right now, there's like tons of CI tools available for you, starting from Jenkins or Buildkite or GitLab or Azure DevOps. And there's also something called Bitrise. So it depends on your team and your company structure that, you know, the way you want to actually select a tool set. So for example, if you want to take my example, I work in a mobile app agency where we work on like a variety of mobile apps specifically, which ranges from like a 3-month project to like a 4-year project or whatever. So we should be able to like spin up mobile apps very quickly. And we have to we don't have that much time to invest when it comes to like short-term projects. So during that case, the tool that actually I felt really comfortable with is called Bitrise. And for example, if you work on a product side, it's different. So for example, you can actually go with Jenkins, where you have full control over your whole setup, and you can have like agents running on the premises, and you can have your test devices connected and all that. So it depends on like where you are at in terms of your team and in terms of your availability and all that. So in this presentation, I'll be using Bitrise to show the demo, because Bitrise is something where you can just get started very quickly, and also it's very specifically for mobile apps. So that's why I've chosen Bitrise. You can actually do the same thing that I'm going to show you in any type of tool that you already have. So it's just just for easiness, I'm just going to choose Bitrise for now. So just to help you with selecting the right tool set, this is a quick comparison on where different things sit. So there's not like just one thing that would work for everyone. So it depends on what type of team you have and what type of skill set that you have to actually like set up some of these things. So there's like I'm just comparing some of the leading examples here. So you can compare Jenkins, Bitrise, Azure DevOps, and Buildkite. So most of them have like agent structure where you have your admin panel, your console, where you can set up your pipelines. But to build them, you need your agents, which sits in either your computer or in your premises or on the cloud as well. But when it comes to Bitrise, this is something like an offering that they already have. You don't have to have any sort of agents. It all comes with it. All you need to do is to set up your pipeline and configure it accordingly. And all the build environment stuff is already taken care of. Again, it depends on what type of tools that you're after. It depends on your skill set, as I said. So this is just an example of the types of tool sets that's out there. And you can just go pick and choose based on your particular customization. So let's get into an example, a real-time example of how you would set up a CI/CD workflow for specifically mobile. So let me quickly show you what the pipeline would look like. So this one is similar to what a web pipeline would look like as well, but it's just like the way things are set up is different. So usually you would have your repository connected and the way you trigger a build. So the triggering can be done either manually, or you would usually have like your repository pushes to actually trigger a pipeline. And then you have your build section where you actually build your app. And then there's the test section where you would run all your end-to-end tests. And finally, you've got the deploy. Before we get started, I want to show what app that I'll be using to actually test this one. So I'll be using something called Swag Labs React Native app. So this is hosted by, this is actually created by Sauce Labs. It's open source, it's available on GitHub. So this is just an example mock app where you can just go and buy some products. So there's like an end-to-end workflow here where you can go and check out and add your name and all that. So we'll be actually building this as part of an example. The reason I chose the React Native app is that it will give you an idea of how you would usually set up a cross-platform app where there's also iOS and Android components involved. So that way we can cover a lot of bases in here when it comes to mobile apps. So that's the app we'll be using. And let's get started. So just to get started, you need to create an app in Bitrise first. So I'm going to use Bitrise here. Yeah, it's similar to whatever you want to pick. It will be this almost similar to how you want to manage. So you go and first create a pipeline. So I'm just going to create one, and you would usually select your repository here. So I'm going to choose the sample app mobile, which is the actual repository that this app is hosted in. And you would be using your adding your SSH key, and you would select a particular branch that you want to start with. So once you select with Bitrise, you have this configuring section where it would scan your repository and would look for what type of app it is, and it will give you like a template to start with. It will give you a skeleton pipeline. So what's happening is once this project scanner has finished running, it would know that, okay, this is a React Native app, and it would give you that configuration to start with. So it will say, okay, for Android project, what's the actual app and variant that you want to use? And similarly for iOS as well, it would show what type of scheme and what type of variant that you want to use. So in this case, it's the Swag Labs mobile app scheme. And you can also choose like the export method that you want to do. I'm going to choose ad hoc here because that way we can try to host it in Bitrise itself and try to install it from there. So once you're done, you can just confirm it, and you can set up the webhook. So once it's all done, you can set up your webhook to actually push your builds. And that's it. So you can see that in a matter of 2 minutes, we've got a first build up and running. So that's the good thing about having these cloud-based CI tools, where you can just get started very quickly. So now that we have a pipeline initially ready, I'm going to show you. Oh, this is the other example. So you can either do this automatically. You can let Bitrise to choose what type of app you have, or you can also do manual configuration as well. So you can choose, okay, I want to have this pipeline specifically for iOS app. So you can choose iOS and add your configuration later in there. And just to show, once you've set that up, you have like an initial skeleton app, a skeleton pipeline that Bitrise provides you with. You can go and modify. And the way Bitrise is set up is it's made up of steps. So each step does a specific thing. And there's like a step for most of the tools that you would actually do. For example, you can either do an Android build, an iOS build, or you could actually send a Slack notification. So everything is made up of steps. So all of these steps are just a wrapper of the actual command that actually does it. And all of these are open source, so you can go and contribute to it, or you can modify it to the way you want it. So this is the example of Slack message step. They can go and just add it to your pipeline. And it has the basic API and all that already configured. You just need to add your API key, and the contents of most of them are actually pre-filled. So it'll just be easier for you to just send a Slack notification straight away. So just an example of how Bitrise works and how it's set up. And yeah, most of the other tools are similar as well. And just as an FYI, you also have the ability to set up your YAML side as well. So if you want to do something using your YAML configuration, that's also possible. Or you can just use the GUI version of it as well. So the next thing is, let's get started with the first step, which is to trigger an actual build. So as I mentioned, now that we've actually connected this to a repository and the master branch, any push to a master branch would create a new build. But if you want to modify that, you should be able to go into something called the trigger section. And this is once you go to the trigger section, you can choose what type of workflow that you want to create for. So for example, in here, any type of push would deploy the primary workflow. So you can set it up like that. Or you can say, okay, I want to set up a develop branch to actually push my deploy workflow. So whenever there's a push happening to develop, it would deploy this particular workflow. And also you can add any number of triggers you wanted. For example, if you want to do something for staging, you could do that as well. Or if you want to do for like a release branch, you can add like a release/star. So any release branch would be actually pushing this particular workflow. So it's up to you on how your Git processes are set up. You can modify your triggers accordingly. And there's also like, for example, you can also set up something for pull requests or based on tags. It's up to you. So this is quite important because it defines your process and makes things more easier. So that's the first step, which is to actually trigger. So the second section is to actually build your app. So now we'll be trying to build the React Native app. see what are the steps involved in there. I'll be going and starting a new build using the feature branch. So let's say any push to feature branch would actually trigger this particular build. So I've set up a workflow like that. And let's go and have a look at what that particular workflow would look like. So because this is a React Native app, you need to, so I'm going to show an example of how you would do an Android build. But because this is a React Native app, you need to actually build your React Native components prior to actually building your Android app. So these two sections in there would actually perform those NPM commands. Make sure you build and bundle your NPM, your React Native app first, and then you have your Android build, where you go and select the type of variant you wanted, and you say, I want an APK output, and finally, this particular step would provide you that particular output. So all this is doing, this particular step is actually doing, is that it's actually like running the assemble debug command for you within the Gradle wrapper. So it just looks a bit easier because but if you look at it deeply, all it does is just that runs that particular command. So let's go and have a look at what that output would look like once the build is completed. So now you see that the build has succeeded. And if you click the logs and look at it, you'll have logs for every section. So we've got the React Native section initially, which runs the NPM scripts in there. And you also got the Android build section here. So as I mentioned, all this does, it just runs the debug variant, and it would just, build the debug variant and provide you with that particular APK output. So you the step in there, which is called deploy to Bitrise, that would upload all the artifacts to this particular build. So the building part is straightforward. And because Bitrise has already known that this is a particular React Native app, that the template it gives you already have this build configuration in there. So you just need to go and modify it according to what you wanted the pipeline to be. And the next section, which is the trickier bit, is the test. So now that, to give you a bit more context, as I said, your build is happening in this particular virtual machine, which is actually the Mac OS virtual machine that I've actually selected. And to run it, you can't just run it in your virtual machine itself, because to set up an emulator, it's a bit complicated. So what we'll be using to run the test is to run it using the Firebase test lab. So just at least with Bitrise, it comes up with that initial Firebase setup. So you don't have to actually add another layer to it. But you can also, for example, if you're using other CI tools like GitLab or Buildkite, you can actually use add another layer called Firebase test lab to it. So let's look at how things are done in Bitrise at least. So I've created a new workflow called test, which would just run the test of the Android app. So I've got a couple of example tests that I've set up. And if you go to the test workflow, you can see that I've got the React Native section where it would just build your app. But in the second section, starting here, I've got the build test app. So the way the virtual devices work is that you need to build your test app and then upload it to the test lab. So in your device farm, that test app would be installed and all your tests would run accordingly. So that's different to building your actual production app. So that's different. So what we'll be running here is your Android test app. It's called Assemble Debug Android Test. So it's got all the end-to-end tests that I've written. And there's a step called run test on virtual device. So there's an iOS one and there's an Android one. First, let's look at the Android one. You can see that I can specify what type of tests that I'm going to be running in that particular virtual device. And finally, you've got your deploy, where you would deploy all your test results. So that's with Android. Now let's have a look at how virtual devices work for iOS. And also let's also have a look at how the artifacts would look like. So now you can see that this particular assemble debug Android test has completed, and you can see that the virtual device step has succeeded with the test have completed. So you can have a look at the output artifacts. So in order to do that, you can just click on the test report section here. Once you click on the test report, it would just open up the Firebase test lab reports. So you can see that it's run on Nexus 9 and it's got one test case. It's run under 1 minute. So it's got screenshots and videos where you can go and have a look at the test run. Things have failed, if it's a failed, and also if it's passed, you can see how it's actually done. So you can play the video and see that this is the login test that I've written using Android Espresso. You can see that the test run happening here. And also you can see that there's some screenshot at the end on all the artifacts there as well. So it gives you a comprehensive output here where you can go and like debug later if you want it. This is similar to what the other CI tools provides as well. You can go and check out what the other offerings are. But yeah, in terms of Bitrise, it uses Firebase to provide these test results. And finally, the last section is to actually deploy your app. So what we'll be doing is I'll be selecting the Android. I'll be testing it for iOS one because deploying iOS apps are pretty hard. So let's look at that example and see how to handle them. Firstly, let's go and look at the actual workflow to do the deploy. When it comes to React Native apps, deploy happens in 2 steps. So you need to build your Android app first, and you need to build your iOS app second. So it's a bit, you can't just do everything together. So it has to be separate. So you can see here that I've got a bundle iOS command here, which would actually bundle my iOS React Native part. And you can then run your Xcode archive where it would build your iOS app. So you can see that I've got the npm install and post install commands. And then I've got this to actually bundle your React Native stuff. And then you just run this command, which would bundle it. And you can see that this platform I'm passing in is actually iOS. So if it's Android, it would be different, which I'll show you later. So what happens here is that you would bundle it and you would actually download the certificates, and then you would actually run the export command. So here you can see that I've selected the Bitrise scheme, the scheme I've actually initially mentioned. And you can see that I'm running the debug configuration. I'm actually specifying the ad hoc method. So that's the iOS section. And now the Android section is to actually, I'm going to do the run the same bundle command, but this time I'm using Android. And you can see that the command is a bit different where you need to specify the asset destination, all that. But it's pretty similar. So you're just bundling your Android one instead of iOS. And you can see that now I'm bundling my Android app separate. So once you do that, you can just run your assemble debug, and that will build your Android app for you. With this example, you can see that we've actually tried to build both the iOS and the Android apps, and we've also incorporated the React Native section there. Let's go and see how the output would look like. So this is the successful run of the deploy workflow. And you can see that we've completed the bundle iOS, and it's already run the Xcode archive. And you can also see that it's run the Android one as well successfully. Now we can go and have a look at the artifacts. So to look at the artifacts, there's this column on the top, which is called apps and artifacts. So if you click on it, you can see all the app artifacts. So we've got the IPA for which we can use for the iOS app, and we've got the appdebug.apk, which is the Android variant. So in order to install them, so there is like something called the public install page. Yeah, so usually you can either use third-party artifact handlers like App Center or TestFairy or things like that, or you could just use the Bitrise one, which is already built in. So Bitrise provides you a way to access these outputs, and you can actually like scan if you have like a mobile app where you want to install it, you can just click on this link and you scan the QR code, and that would directly take you to the installation. So this way, you have that continuous deployment happening where you can just go, and once the build is completed, you can just go and install it and straight away go from there. That's pretty much it in terms of the building stuff. We'll be talking a little bit more on how the Xcode setup happens, because in order to build your iOS app, you need to set up those signing configuration properly. So that's the hardest bit when it comes to building mobile apps, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. What will happen is now that you have like an end-to-end structure going on, so let's look at some of the specific challenges when it comes to mobile. So we've actually touched a little bit about this in the earlier slides, but what we'll do is have a look at them in depth. So let's start with code signing. As I mentioned, iOS code signing, in my experience, has been the hardest bit to maintain. So I've got like, in my experience, I've done the deployments using just the Fastlane commands, the code signing using Fastlane. I've done code signing using just the pure Xcode build stuff. So I've done it a variety of ways. And the problem with that is the maintenance becomes very hard. So that's when this utility becomes very handy. And Bitrise has done a pretty good job about how to handle code signing. So even though you don't use code signing, even though you don't use Bitrise, you can still use the open source tool called code signing doc, which is this command. So what this code signing doc does is it will help you extract all your code signing artifacts. For example, you need your certificates, you need your provisioning profile, and you need all this to actually like sign this stuff. So in order to actually extract them, you can use this tool. So what this tool does is it will scan your iOS app and say, okay, what's the actual scheme that you're trying to use? In this case, I'm using the Swag Labs mobile app scheme, and it would actually run this this command, which is the XC archive, to then see what are the particular provisioning profiles and certificates that you need to actually run to sign your files. So at the end of it, it will, once this archive is done, you can see that it's asking me to do, okay, your archive is completed. So these are the types of IPA that you included. So which one do you want? So let's say we want ad hoc. We just say 3, and it would actually export those code signing files for you. So if you're using, for example, GitLab or anything, you can still use this particular tool to export all these code signing documents, and you can upload it to that. But because this is a tool that Bitrise has created, you can actually use the same tool to upload it to Bitrise itself. So the second part of this demo has that once you finish all your identity exports, you can actually enter your Bitrise API key. Then once you enter that, it would actually like upload it straight away to Bitrise. So for example, like I'm adding my key here. Once I add my key here, I can see that it's actually showing me the list of apps that I've got. So I just choose the particular app I wanted it to upload it to. And you can see that it's already there in the particular Bitrise app. So it's all been uploaded, and you can go to Bitrise and straight away start using them, which is great. And also the other one is you can also have it exported locally. So even though if you don't want to use Bitrise, as I mentioned, you can still use this tool to actually to export all this code signing docs, which is great. So this is one way you can actually handle and like mitigate some of the risk that comes with signing. So the second challenge is, as I mentioned, is the build environment. So let's say you are going to use Jenkins as your CI tool. So you need to have particular agents for Xcode and particular agents for running your Android builds. So you can either do that and try to maintain them properly, because whenever there's a new Xcode version, you need to manually go and update that. So you need to be wary of the maintenance stuff that happens with tools like Jenkins. Or you can go with something that's been provided by Bitrise, where they would maintain it for you. And in the app itself, you can go and select what type of Xcode version you're using, so that you can have the build up properly set for that particular environment. The other challenge that when it comes to the test environments is to where you want to run your tests. So as I mentioned, if you use Jenkins or Build Guide, you can actually use your agents to run your tests. In your agent, you would have your mobile devices connected. So whenever there's a test running, it would happen locally. Or you can use something like virtual device testing when it comes to Bitrise or some of the online providers. So this is an example of the virtual device testing for Android, where you can say, okay, I'm going to run this particular test in Nexus with Android version 24, and I'm going to use this particular type of test. There's also the iOS variant for this as well, where you can run your iOS test on the Firebase Test Lab. So you can choose for what particular device you wanted, and it will run this test on that particular thing for you. The next section, which is a bit challenging, is the working with cross-platform apps. So in this example, we've seen how to work with React Native apps. So as you've seen there, before we run the Android and iOS builds, you need to actually bundle your React Native section separately. So that becomes hard, because what happens is, let's say with React Native app, you have multiple frameworks like Expo. You can also use like the vanilla framework that it comes with. What happens is you need to have there's two parts to it. There's the React Native part and the native part, which is Android or iOS. If you just want to use like a very simple app with React Native, it's fine. There's no major considerations there. But when it comes to like customization, let's say we want to assign like environment variables to your React Native app, then things become complicated. Especially in CI, you need to make sure you're building the right scheme properly, and the Android and the React Native sections properly talk to each other. So you need to be wary of it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you just need to be wary of it when it comes to building cross-platform apps in CI. That's some of the challenges that actually I've faced in the past apps I worked with. Then the final one is to try and manage your artifacts. You can see that in the initial example I've actually brought up, which is the React app, where you have a web URL you can go to and use it straight away. This is quite different, because you need to be able to install it in your phone. And in trying to manage your installations for iOS is particularly harder because they've got a lot of restrictions. Something like Bitrise or some of the cloud platforms is very helpful because it would actually do those things for you. There's some of the behind the scenes places where you need to actually specify where this particular iOS app can be downloaded from so that it can actually make sure it's not being pirated or all that. So all these things can be handled with Bitrise or some of the cloud platforms that you can use. So something that you need to be wary about as well when you try to do things for mobile apps. So you can actually find this particular pipeline, the YAML version of the pipeline in my GitHub. I've attached it for you so you can have a look and play around with it. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask me now as well. So I'll try to answer as much as I can possible.